how are you seeing the ad markets and the media investment climate specifically across Asia and specifically Indonesia and Southeast Asia over this year and next?
Well, so it's interesting. So if you look globally, I think it's still growing, and we all know where all the money is going to. We think it's coming out of linear TV and going into streaming, going into OTT, etc. And what's interesting is you also made the point about growth being harder to work for, and what we're seeing now is actually that growth is now harder to extract. So we're seeing actually projections that we made even in December being having to be revised a little bit downward, so from 7% globally to 6%. What's interesting about Southeast Asia is Southeast Asia has remained constant, right, in terms of our thing. So it's still 6% growth. So that says to me that, again, the themes, there's a lot of scaling going on, there's a lot of optimism, and it's still a very big market for us and big opportunities there. And Indonesia, very similar.
We have to look at Southeast Asia increasingly, particularly in what we call, I guess, video, in the lens of TikTok and YouTube. And to some extent Meta, but those two platforms, because they dominate user time, but they're also dominating a lot of new dollars that come into this space. When your brands look at those two platforms, what are you telling them about, YouTube and TikTok, and balancing investment between them and some of the premium video platforms that we've been hearing about today, and also I guess we're hearing about later with Paxatanto and MTech?
And I think we have to take a step back and think about where they're coming from. And I'm going to focus particularly on multinationals, right? So at the moment, there is not a surprise that they are struggling, right? So the business is under pressure. So they are they're looking at short term. They're looking at what can this do for me now? What is it going to deliver in terms of share? That's one. And that also means for us in terms of how we speak and the language we use, we need to start talking more about business and maybe less about brand, right? So I think that's where TikTok and some of the other platforms are very, very good, talking about immediate return. I think that the second thing is also that a lot of the big multinationals are talking about social first. And I think that's also a push, because when they hear social first, everyone thinks social channels, YouTube, and TikTok. And that's actually not, when you unpack it, that's not what it means. It means around the themes we heard today. How can you become more relevant in culture? How can you actually connect in a more meaningful way to consumers? And that is not only the domain of the TikToks on those platforms. Premium content has an absolute role to play in that space.
Because we've seen this obviously with GeoStar earlier in the morning. Should the premium video industry here, whether it's video and MNC Digital and View and players like that, be talking about themselves to advertisers and representing themselves to advertisers in a different way?
I think yes and no. I think they are still having those conversations, but I think that the challenge is that we're having a conversation where we have to talk to clients about, it's not a choice of TV or TikTok, it's both. What do they both add, and what role do they have in a great media plan, in a great advertising campaign? Because they don't do the same things, but they're both equally important. And if we try to, I think we have to embrace the fact that it's the plus bit, it's not an either or bit.
Are advertisers responding more to TikTok and players like that because there seems to be a much more problem-solving path, a data measurement path, so they can see a better solution-based strategy for them from that TikTok offers?
I think that
premium VOD doesn't.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. I think they talk the language of business, so they talk about GMV, they talk about something that actually then that can be taken back to their CFO and their headquarters to say, here's what we're translating. I think as well, they are also selling one of the challenges is a client, and this is not correct, but a client sometimes compares a CPM of an OTT player and a YouTube CPM, and you can't compare them because they're not the same thing. They don't do the same thing. So again, it's about making sure that we explain that there is a role for each on a media plan, and we need to start talking about, we need to own the whole thing, not just our part. Where does OTT sit in the big ecosystem?
Now, video commerce and community are coming together, and Indonesia is a big, big example of that. What does that mean for your clients and for brand planning going forward?
It means you can't plan in channels anymore, so the funnel has pretty much collapsed. So it's really to say all channels can do everything. It's really about establishing a consumer journey around it, and also making sure that, as much as, a lot of the insights that Sam talked about and you talked about, and also what's the cultural role that these brands can play in yes. Indonesia as well. And I think that's also super important. I think, interestingly, that there is a misperception that somehow these social platforms are more authentic and have a bigger role in culture than actually premium content does. And I don't think that's the case at all. The other interesting thing, which I also think is amazing around Indonesia, and it's not related specifically to Total TV, is that Indonesia has, I think it's one of the top 10 markets that's using ChatGPT, which is amazing in the sense of what does that actually mean for consumers, and how are they discovering brands, how are they discovering your content, and how do we have to actually stitch the ecosystem of paid media, owned media, and earned media together, because those agents now are not just looking at what you advertise, but also what other people are saying about you, what you are saying about yourself. So I think when we always, I'm a media person, right?
Yeah, of course.
So when I talk about paid, owned, and earned, it was always big P, little o,
right.
little e. Now, with these agents, O and E are no longer the little brothers and sisters. They are now equal partners in paid media, and we have to learn to really stitch those all together across all channels.